Jerusalem, the Jewish people and the land of Israel. The Kingdom of Israel occupied that part of the land on the Mediterranean Sea known as the Levant, which corresponds roughly to the state of Israel of modern times. Historically, the region was known as part of Canaan, as Phoenicia, like Palestine, Yehud Medinata, Judea, and, after the Romans destroyed the region in 136 CE, as Syria-Palaestina. According to the Bible, the region was named after the Hebrew patriarch Jacob, also known as Israel, from Yisrae'el, meaning to persevere with God, and, by extension, his nation. Israel was the region colonized by Abram, later Abraham, developed by his son Isaac and grandson Jacob, and later allegedly conquered by the Hebrew general Joshua around 1250 BCE, following the Exodus from Egypt under Moses. Israel as a cultural entity is first mentioned in the stele of the Egyptian pharaoh Merenta, 1213–1203 BCE, in which he states that Israel lies devastated, bereft of its seed, Kerrigan, 59. The reference seems to be to a people, not a kingdom, but no scholarly consensus has been reached on a final meaning or even why Israel should be mentioned on a stele that celebrates an Egyptian victory over the Libyans unless the Israelites were part of the coalition known as the Sea Peoples, which is improbable. By circa 1080 BCE the Israelites had established kingship in the land and developed a culture that drew on earlier civilizations. This interpretation of history is at odds with the traditional belief that the Israelites appeared in Canaan and imposed their culture on a pre-existing population following a military conquest of the region. The kingdom split in two following the death of King Solomon, 965 to 931 BCE, with the kingdom of Israel to the north and Judah to the south. In 722 BCE the northern kingdom was destroyed by the Assyrians and the population was deported as per Assyrian military policy, resulting in the so-called lost 10 tribes of Israel. Judah was destroyed by the Babylonians in 598 to 582 BCE and the most influential citizens of the region were taken to Babylon. Following their conquest of the Babylonian Empire, the Persians returned the Israelites to their homeland in 538 BCE, and held the region as part of their empire until it fell to Alexander the Great, 356 to 323 BCE. Following Alexander's death, the region was held by Ptolemy I and then the Seleucid Empire until 168 BCE when the Israelites revolted under the leadership of the Maccabees who established the Hasmonean dynasty. The region was taken by Rome in 63 BCE and the people's resentment against foreign occupation resulted in periods of more or less unrest until the Bar Kokhba revolt of 132 to 136 CE in which the Jews were defeated, Jerusalem destroyed, and the area renamed Syria-Palaestina by the Roman Emperor Hadrian. According to the narrative in the biblical book of Genesis, the patriarch Abram led his people to the land of Canaan as directed to by his God, 12:1-5. In Canaan, Abraham and then his son Isaac and then his son Jacob, Israel, established the culture of the Hebrews, literally, wanderers. Jacob had 12 sons but favored his youngest, Joseph, which enraged his brothers, and so they sold him to the Ishmaelites as a slave and he was then resold in Egypt. Once there, he rose to prominence through his ability to interpret dreams, and became a powerful administrator who saved the region from starvation during a famine. At this time, Joseph's brothers and father came and settled in Egypt as welcome guests, Genesis 37, 39-47. According to the book of Exodus, in time, the Israelites became too populous and were enslaved by the Egyptians, 1:7-11. The Israelites remained in bondage until they were liberated by Moses the lawgiver who brought them to the land of Canaan, which had been promised to his people by their God. Moses was unable to enter the land himself owing to a misunderstanding with this God and passed his leadership to his second-in-command, Joshua, who then led the Israelites to victory over the indigenous people and divided the land among his own, Deuteronomy 32:51-52, Joshua 1-19. This version of history in the military conquest of Canaan, it should be noted, is only found in the Bible and, while archaeological evidence in the region once known as Canaan does support widespread upheaval in the region between c. 1250 c. 1150 BCE, said evidence does not fit neatly with the biblical narrative. Whether there was such a general named Joshua and whether the Hebrews did, in fact, conquer the Canaanites is a matter of belief in the biblical narrative. It has been established, however, that something of moment did occur c. 1250 c. 1150 BCE, the Bronze Age collapse, which resulted in a displacement of indigenous people, not only in Canaan, but elsewhere throughout the Near East. Some modern-day scholars completely reject the claim of a conquest and point to archaeological evidence to support their contention that the Israelites peacefully assimilated with the Canaanites and that belief in a conquest of the region by an Israelite general only emerged much later during the period of the Babylonian captivity of 598 to 538 BCE and was only codified as part of the biblical narrative during the Second Temple period, c. 515 BCE, 70 CE. The counterclaim to the biblical narrative is that Abram was an Amorite in Mesopotamia who relocated to Canaan and that later Hebrew scribes, unsatisfied with their ancestral ties to Mesopotamia, created a new history which highlighted their people's unique relationship with the one true God of the universe in order to establish political superiority. They elevated a minor Canaanite deity, Yahweh, to the level of supreme being and then instituted religious practices to further distance themselves from others in the region. This theory, as Miller and Hayes point out, is just as largely guesswork and belief as acceptance of the biblical narrative, but also note that extra-biblical documentation and archaeological evidence suggest that the region at this time was something of a melting pot, composed of diverse elements living under various ad hoc political and religious circumstances, which formed the basis of the later kingdoms of Israel and Judah, 78. According to this theory, there was no conquest but only a gradual assimilation of immigrants into the general population of the region. Israel developed into a united kingdom under the leadership of King David, c. 1035-970 BCE, who consolidated the various tribes under his single rule, having taken over from Israel's first king, Saul, who ruled circa 1080 to 1010 BCE. David chose the Canaanite city of Jerusalem as his capital and is said to have had the Ark of the Covenant moved there. As the Ark was thought to contain the living presence of God, bringing it to Jerusalem would have made the city both a political and religious center of considerable importance. David intended to build a great temple to house the Ark, but that task fell to his son, Solomon, whose rule corresponds to the height of Israelite grandeur as depicted in the Bible. Solomon consolidated treaties with neighboring kingdoms such as Tyre to the north, Egypt, Sheba, and sponsored building projects which made Jerusalem a great and opulent city, including, of course, the First Temple. The reigns of Saul, David, and Solomon, but especially the latter two, have been traditionally characterized as a golden age of unity and prosperity, although scholars have noted that the biblical account itself records economic difficulties which led to ceding cities to the Phoenicians, 1 Kings 9:10-14, and Solomon's brutal policies which led to Judah breaking away from the kingdom after his death, 1 Kings 12:1-20. The religion of the Kingdom of Israel was Henotheistic, a belief in many gods with a focus on a single most powerful deity among them, and David, as Saul before him, emphasized the preeminence of the God Yahweh as the focus of worship. David and Solomon, especially, seem to have used this belief to their benefit in unifying the people, but after Solomon's reign the kingdom split in half, Israel occupying the northern region with a capital at Samaria and the kingdom of Judah in the south with Jerusalem as capital. The two kingdoms would thereafter sometimes ally and sometimes war, but would never again achieve the strength and wealth of the kingdom during the reigns of David and his son. The kingdom of Israel prospered under the reigns of the kings Omri, c. 876-869 or 884 to 872 BCE, and Ahab, c. 876-853 BCE, and, later, Jehu's dynasty, 842 to 746 BCE, according to archaeological evidence and the biblical narrative, but seems often characterized by instability resulting from the rivalry between Israel and Judah. Even so, under Ahab's reign, Israel was a major military power as evidenced by the stele inscription of Shalmaneser III of Assyria, 859 to 824 BCE, who states that Ahab was able to field a massive army against him consisting of over 2,000 chariots and 10,000 infantry, although modern scholarship has contested these numbers. By the time of the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah, c. 715-686 BCE, however, Judah had become the more powerful of the two kingdoms. In 722 BCE the kingdom of Israel fell to the Assyrians under Sargon II, r. 722-705 BCE, and, as per Assyrian policy, the population was relocated to other regions, resulting in the lost 10 tribes of Israel. The exception to this domination was the city of Jerusalem, which withstood Assyrian aggression. Hezekiah, according to the Bible, witnessed the fall of Samaria and focused on preparations to protect his capital city of Jerusalem. He was able to prepare Jerusalem to withstand the Assyrian siege of 703 BCE under Sargon II's son Sennacherib, r. 705-681 BCE, through the construction of the Siloam Tunnel and Broad Wall, which can still be seen today, but, even so, afterwards paid the Assyrians tribute as a vassal state. When the Assyrian Empire fell in 612 BCE to a coalition led by the Babylonians and Medes, the Babylonians took the region, sacked Jerusalem, and destroyed the temple in 598 BCE. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II, r. 634-562 BCE, then deported the aristocracy, scribes, and skilled craftsmen back to Babylon, an event known as the Babylonian captivity. Further Babylonian military campaigns from 589 to 582 BCE destroyed the kingdom of Judah. Babylon was conquered by the Persians under Cyrus the Great, d. 530 BCE, who released the Jews to return to their homeland in c. 538 BCE. The destruction of their cities, and deportation from a land they believed had been promised them by their God, forced the Jewish clergy to rethink their religious beliefs.